have it. I'd like to take the budget items all together. Can I get a motion for the budget? Rob and Brian, thank you. Any discussion? Danny?
I'd like to make an amendment to the budget. I would like an additional $30,000 to be allocated to court administration and an additional $30,000 for a total amount of $60 to be added to adult probation. This will be to support the grant writer position that's been previously discussed. This is going to be shared a third, and a
All right, any other discussion on the budget? Okay, we do have a presentation from the JDC. Scott will pull up. Do you guys want to come on up? What, Brian?
Oh, I thought you were going to do it the same way you did last year. Everybody's already seen it.
Yeah. Skipped right over it though.
All right, good afternoon. Brian Brown, I'm the Director of Court Services. So I did prepare a slide deck that has already been sent out to you. This does have a couple of modifications into it. I apologize, it's 25 slides, but trust me, it was about 50 when we started, so we pared it down. You didn't want to listen to me read through it all, so. Okay, yep, sorry. So I wanted to kind of present an overview of JDC's budget and try to answer some of the questions. I kind of want to start off with some of the new standards in the juvenile justice field. We have had two new sets of standards, one from the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice, another one from AOIC, and then we also have a regulatory body from the Prison Rape Elimination Act. So these two new sets of standards have created some significant challenges. Along with these new standards, we had some legislative input with the in solitary confinement, which limits our ability to secure a kid in their room for 15 minutes. And more importantly, it allows a kid to voluntarily go back to his room, which may not sound like a lot. If our building's spread out and a kid wants to go back to the room, now it takes one of our staff all the way back in the room to stay with them, and you can't leave them, even though they're secured in a room. So we will have a group in education, a group down in the gym, a group in eating breakfast or lunch or dinner, and then we might have a couple kids secured in a room at their request. So that's been pretty significant. Other significant contributions to that is we increase the visits for an hour. So when we do visitation 7 days a week, and now we have an hour visit, used to be a half hour. So we are tiring up staff to supervise those visits the entire time. So those are some kind of the new impact over the last year and a half, 2 years. So often I was asked who has authority over the facility. Again, AOIC, which is through the Supreme Court, which is our regulatory body, and it's our funding mechanism too. DJJ also has oversight. They do audits once a year. AOIC does them every other year. And then the PREA, the federal mandated PREA, is every 3 years. So I had a couple questions I want to highlight on food cost and ISBE. We also are audited by Illinois State Board of Education. If you could go to slide 5, please. So we kind of broke out. So it's not just the cost that we contract with the jail, with Sheriff Hawkins and pay the food. We also have to supplement that because they're kids, and the nutritional value. We have a dietitian that requires to meet these standards of the additional food that we have to buy. So we kind of broke out some of those costs, and our reimbursement by the year, so we put in 2020 was like $5,600. This year about $5,600 through September. So that is on the revenue side for some of those food costs. Sorry, Scott, my slides are different than yours.
You just tell me when to advance and I'll do that.
Okay. So wanted to put that in there. Again, looking at the food cost. Again, that's a contractual relationship that we have with the sheriff that we go pick up. So if you go to slide 11, please. Another question that I was asked, or can you go to the overtime one? Sorry. I put a floor plan. I'm a visual person, so I put a floor plan out there that looks what our staffing requirements are. So all these standards and regulations that oversee us require a direct care supervision, which is defined in the same room and a reasonable hearing distance. So this is our layout with 2 of our units. If you have not been in our facility, we have 3. C unit has been closed for 16, 17 years plus. So our operational capacity is 42. So these are our requirements to have 3 staff in each unit. And again, that's a direct correlation between the number of kids that we have. So if we have in one of our units, if we have 9 kids, that requires 2 staff in that unit. So my 2 staff requirement in A and B, if we have 9 or 16 on those units, the staffing requirements don't change. And then the master control is up there. And then the 2 floaters are doing intakes, releases, checking in visitors, releases, checking in and escorting kids from A to B throughout the facility. So are there any questions on overtime? Because that was one of the big questions. The generator of the overtime is the requirements for our staffing. When we don't have the ability to hire staff because no one's applying, we are filling that with overtime and at times mandating overtime, which is paid at double time. So it doesn't take too long for overtime to spike. People don't mind having some overtime until it's the 3rd time this week, and they work their 8 hours, and we force them to work another 8 hours. Could you go to the next one, please? One of the slide decks here that I'd like to point out is within JDC's budget, we also operate a detention alternative program. So we wanted to put the maximum of kids in our custody. So not only do we have the 30 average in our custody and the secure side, we also have our home detention, but we are supervising in the community. So we have 2 of our staff that go out in the community, do home checks per the court order on conditions of their release. So that's the total amount that is incorporated in JDC's budget. And a lot of times that gets kind of lost because that's another 22 kids that we're responsible for. Okay, go to the next one, please. So this is a new one. If you have not seen this, we added in here. Our population ebbs and flows by the day. So we wanted to give a representation. The yellow line there is our average daily population. Then we have our population and our outer counties, and you can just see by the day how it spikes. Our range for this year is from 20 to 41. So in one day we may have 15, 16, 20 kids, and then so that's where how volatile it is. And we don't control a lot of our inputs or any of our inputs per se. The number of crimes that are committed, who law enforcement arrests, who screens out in our mandated screening instrument that we have to do, and then who the state's attorney's office decides to prosecute, and then who the judge orders into our care. But I thought this was important to add in here that just shows you the differences. And then when we talk about staffing, we have to remember we would have openings, but we'd also have some on FMLA, some on work comp, and then regular benefit time. What happens with mandated overtime is people get mandated and they turn around, know they're going to get mandated the next day, so they call in sick, which exasperates the problem. That's the nature of a 24-hour facility, and we're not immune to those. All 24-hour facilities just really struggle with this. We have struggled coming out of COVID, through COVID, and coming out of COVID. Could you go to 14, please, Scott? Wanted to give you kind of an idea of a snapshot of the kids that we have in custody. So this was a week and a half ago, 37 kids detained, 19 kids on adult cases and or pending adult transfer. I highlighted those charges. They're pretty significant. Then the question that I had is, well, why are you holding a kid that is being an adult? They are to be held in our custody until they turn 18. So we have a couple of these kids on here that are 14 being charged with murder. They will be in our custody either until their case is disposed of in the court system or they turn 18. The next 10 are all firearm related charges. So the next step down is, aggravated UW, which is pretty prevalent in our community, unfortunately. Then there's 5 that are related gun violent charges and 3 possession of stolen motor vehicle. So we thought it was important to put that in there to really kind of capture who we are, who are we holding, and what are we dealing with. So can you go to 15, please? I know there was a lot of questions on the increase in our salaries. We did work with AOIC to fund some of our increases. Coming out of COVID, we were about $43,000 starting out. We are at $50,000 now. The direct correlation for those increases, AOIC has agreed to fund those, and that's evident by on our revenue side and our expense side in those funded positions. AOIC funds, the term grant and aid is the term that they use. And so what that means, it's 100% of their salaries, any kind of performance bonuses, longevity bonuses, any reimbursement like that's in the CBA. It does not cover overtime. That is in our budget that we do not get reimbursement dollars for. So this chart kind of just shows you the correlation between the reimbursement and those positions. We do not get reimbursement if those positions are not filled, so that nets out on the revenue side. So we have definitely struggled attracting and retaining. Thus was why we wanted to increase our starting wages. And fortunately, we've been successful doing that. It has helped why we still have many openings today. August 1st, we only had 1 opening of our YDSs, which is our direct care staff. Unfortunately, we had a significant incident, 2 incidents of late that resulted in multiple people quitting. And that's just the nature of working inside a secure facility. Fortunately, nobody was majorly hurt. If you could go to 16, Scott. So this gives a little bit more detail on AOIC reimbursement to the total cost. And so there are other positions out there, such as support staff, food and laundry. We do have transport officers that transport our kids to and from court. So we're not taking our direct care staff out of facilities because they would not be able to be included in the ratio while they're transporting. So those are county funded positions. So that gives a visual representation there. Do you mind going to the next one, 17, please? So another graph that talks about the projected actuals, gives that visualization of what the wages are. And these are full-time wages. We do have line items for part-time. Part of our request was to reallocate some of our FTEs, some of those transport officers, and some of our part-time YDSs into full-time positions that AOIC, that we asked for them to recognize because we found that part-time positions just aren't attractive to people. We were unable to fill them, and it was a struggle the whole time. 18, please. So it just kind of goes to the general fund transfer. The general fund transfer has remained flat at 1.550 the last several years. A couple questions I have for board members. AOIC is required, the state legislature is required to pass funding to fund those positions at 100%. They have not always done that. Fortunately, this will be the 5th year in a row that the state budget has appropriate resources per the legislature. And I would just point out in real dollars, adjusted inflation, that is, I think it'd be about $1.7 million in today's dollars. kind of give you a visual applicant pool. Here's the representation. I'm sorry, 19, please. Back in 14, these are just the applicants. What I will say to this slide, just because somebody applies doesn't mean that they're eligible. So to be eligible for hire, have a 4-year degree from school, you have a criminal record, you got to take a drug test. You can see that it went down pretty good. In 2004, it kind of went back up. So those are just the ones that we were pulling from. You go to the next slide, please. So the next obvious question that I had is looking at turnover. And you can see the turnover rate has been unsustainable. Thus was why we were looking to increase and be more competitive in our package of what we're offering staff. So again, through coming out of COVID, it was 116%. And, that's obviously not sustainable or not good. Basically, from a safety and security, it takes about 6 months, 4 to 6 months to train really a staff that is going to be sufficient out on the floor, provide the services that we do. We do exit interviews, again, advancement opportunities, pay on a lot of mental health, so 15% had some mental health concerns. What I'll say to that, it's a difficult job on a good day. And it's just not for everybody. So we have seen an uptick in some of those exit interviews, and then 13% for relocation and family. Again, just some of the supporting documentation to comparables. When we looked at comps for wages before we started increasing the wages, we were way off. We weren't even in the ballpark, so to speak. But we still face significant headwinds. Why we're at $50,000. The staff that are leaving today are going to DCFS that are in the low 70s, or OSPS that are starting out at 62,000. And then the benefits are different as well. So we still have some work to do. So if you go to the next slide, 23, please. And again, not to bore you with all the hiring requirements, this just shows you from the statute requirement of what we are required to hire. AOIC has to approve them before we can hire them. The next slide is 24, is just some of the initiatives that we put in place. And again, we felt like we were turning the corner come August when we only had one opening in those approved positions. But today we're sitting at 10 openings from the line staff perspective. Just from a statutory reference, we try to include all references in there, some of the things that we have to adhere to. So we got the hyperlinks in there if you're interested in that. So, and the biggest one is the Illinois Juvenile Court Act of 1870 that basically separates out, for the first one in the nation at the time, separates out a court. So we're not a juvenile jail. Kids are treated totally different regulations. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Thank you, Brian. I started with the JDC today because I know it's become clear over the past several months, and especially during the budgetary process, that there's a lot our board or our committee doesn't necessarily understand about the day-to-day operations. So their team is going to start coming to our meetings to present updates either quarterly or monthly as needed. They've committed to do that. They're also very open to questions, so if anything comes up throughout the year, definitely reach out. Additionally, we've talked about forming a work group so we can better understand their operations, so we can dive a little deeper into some of these things that were brought up in terms of both personnel challenges and retention, along with some of the things you just have to do that we can't sway one way or the other. I'm sure part of this disconnection has come from them being located off-site. They report to the courts, but that's no excuse. So I'm hoping if anybody's interested, they can get back to Scott or myself, but we'll throughout the next year, take a little deeper dive into learning about what they're doing and how we can help and be of assistance moving forward. That said, is there any questions that come up from the slideshow or questions related to the budget for Brian? Yes, Sharon.
So I know the the transfer is $1.5 million, but they're also going to be using $330,000 in reserves. Can we get an explanation on what that is going to be used for? Is this some specific projects, or what's going to happen there?
So part of the reallocation of those FTEs to hire a supervisor to be in there for waking, that is one, and then those additional YDSs to provide that security of people coming in and out of the unsecured side, so in our lobby. The other increases in our budget were the medical mental health contract, I believe, was up 70% over the last couple of years, so that's pretty significant increases in medical mental health.
Yes, Steve.
Yeah. First off, thank you, Director Brown, for some additional details. We've had some good discussions on this. Is the FTE count that you're proposing accurate, or is there an adjustment that we should be looking at or understanding?
No, we were going to reallocate ones that we were not using, so our FTE count was added. I will note that in Munis, I think it shows a 59.1. Budget book is 58.85, I believe. We're looking at a flat.
Okay. And the other, the medical contract, maybe you can go a little more detail. I know it was up significantly. I think you signed a new contract with the vendor. I think in the past, the contracts were combined between the Sheriff's Office and JDC. Maybe
Yes.
get a little bit of background on some changes and around that, just to educate us.
Yes, absolutely. When, yes, traditionally we have bid out to bid at the same time, separate contracts, but one bid process. When they notified us beginning of last year, I believe they wanted a 24% increase. By the way, they asked for that at the beginning of the year, or they were going to drop us, similar to what they did to the jail. So we got the same letter that the jail got, so we worked through that. Part of those negotiations were, could we get a cap on next year? So we got an agreement to up to 10% for the following year. We felt like that was a good deal given, you know, the medical staffing. One of the differences between the jail and JDC is the state law requires to have an RN. We were never able to use LPNs in our facility. So you couldn't just have one RN and then LPNs. So all of them are RNs at a higher wage. So we felt good, instead of going back out to bid along with the Sheriff's Office, that we got a cap at 10%, and I believe it came in at 6.5. So it came in about 6.5, and so I thought that was a good deal.
Thank you for that.
Any questions over here? All right, well, oh, yes, Sharon.
Can we get an update on the Sangamon County contract? Because it says anticipated to decrease 12.5% next year due to Sangamon County planning to reopen its detention center.
Yes, so last year they averaged 10 kids, or they sent us 10 kids. We had 441 intakes, so we're looking at a 2.2% of our population through the year. And that was about $100,000 in additional revenue that we didn't expect. They intended to open up in October. However, a couple weeks before they opened up, the superintendent resigned, a supervisor resigned, and a couple staff. So they still are planning to open up, but obviously they're looking for a new superintendent. So we do not currently have any in custody now. The last incident we had, we called them and said, you need to come pick your kids up and find housing elsewhere. So
Any other questions? Well, thank you for those questions, and thank you for the presentation. I understand you have to do everything to ensure both safety and making sure the county isn't liable for anything as well. So lots to keep track of.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, any questions with any other parts of the budget? Yes, Rob.
I have a question on the coroner's budget. Heather might be able to help with this too. And it revolves more around the X-ray equipment that we're gonna be getting. So, for my own knowledge, how much is the unit gonna cost?
We've already bought it. It was part of the new building upgrade. It's 39,000 and change.
Okay, and what's the life expectancy of that?
10 years, but it pays for itself in about the first 3 because right now the coroner's office is required on homicides and violent deaths, house fires, and so on. That we autopsy the decedents, or not autopsy, but we do autopsy them, but we do the X-rays on them, and we spend $250 per X-ray with St. Francis Hospital today. So what's going to happen is our staff will be trained in-house, and there's going to have to be some agreements for contingencies and so on with X-ray techs from the hospital, but we won't be spending that $250 for any of our cases, which is about 30 cases a year that we do our own. But we do autopsies for 11 other counties and private entities as well, so we'll be able to actually charge them the $250 instead of them paying St. Francis. So all in all, it should make us about $15,000 a year, and I just said times 3 years, and we should pay ourselves back. Then moving forward, if we need to replace or do anything outside of that, we can definitely budget for that in advance, but it would be good for 10 years, and it's warranted, I think, for 7. So.
Okay, so when this first came about, when we were talking about the new facility, I had talked to the coroner, and he had agreed that that fee that we would be passing on as part of our morgue fee, now that directly goes to OSF, that maybe we could set up a separate line item just specifically for replacing and maintenance of that equipment, because I'm assuming there'll be maintenance associated with it too.
Sure, and I believe the maintenance is covered during that warranty period as well, so just for that first 7 years, but after that, for sure, we're gonna need to make sure we have something in place.
So then where would we see that? I guess this might be a Heather question. Where might we see that line item within? And have we put some money aside this year for those? Because, 2025, we won't be up and running yet. Do we have money put aside for those
X-rays?
X-rays?
Yes, because to be long-winded here, we did put some money aside for pediatrics. It's not best practice for us to do pediatric X-rays ourselves, and I'm going to explain why. A board-certified pathologist for children need to read those X-rays. On our X-rays, a lot of it's just looking for bullet placement or fractures and so on, but for kids, especially of abuse cases, we have to have that board-certified radiologists for pediatrics read those. So we put money in that budget. We're always very conservative in our budget, so we don't know how many autopsies are going to exactly happen, but we have an idea typically. So we're conservative, but I think there's around $3,000 in there. I think we had 3 pediatric radiology reads that we had to do this year so far. So $3,000 for $250 a pop is not going to hurt us. Yep.
So then my ask would be then, not only would we, if there's money left over in that, if we could move that into a maintenance for the X-ray machine, and then plus the fees that we might receive that we're charging other people, I think just slowly, I think we would build that up. So like you said, in 10 years, we could just pay cash outright and not have to worry about reallocating additional money to the coroner's office.
Absolutely.
So I guess then, Heather, I don't know, how would we track that?
So we can set up a separate revenue line item to track the revenue that's coming in, and then we can budget for planning for annual maintenance or repairs in a separate expense line item. The coroner's budget is paid for out of the general fund, and so we can't set up like a separate fund for it like we would with PTSB, but we can track it internally and make sure that there's, we budget appropriately for that.
I would prefer that than taking it out of like fund balance reserves, so that we know that this is specifically set aside for this purpose.
Okay.
Can I maybe expand your question, Mr. Renault? So you're speaking of the X-ray, but my assumption is there's other significant capital equipment that the coroner's office is using. The same concept would go for the other equipment too, right? So I don't want to just, is there a reason you're singling X-ray out versus some of the other, I'll say, major capital equipment at the coroner's office?
The reason is because currently that fee isn't, we don't see, that's not part of our morgue fee. That's something that if somebody else comes in and uses our facility, they pay, OSF bills them outright. So this would be additional revenue that we haven't had before for the specific purpose of the X-ray. So just trying to keep that kind of siloed, and since it's additional revenue, it go towards why we're getting the revenue.
You're singling it out for the sake of tracking.
Right, right. I mean, it's for, we're getting the revenue for the use of the X-ray, and I just want to make sure that now that we have a new piece of equipment, that in 10 years, we're going to be able to replace it if needed.
But would that not be similar to the additional revenue we generate today from providing coroner services for other entities, other counties and that? I don't get too dicey in it, just trying to make sure that we're not selecting one item out of it and ignoring the rest of it from our revenue and capital items.
Did you have something you wanted to share, Ben?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. So outside of vehicles, that's probably the most expensive thing we buy. Other things are just small commodities, body bags and so on. There's really no other expense. So that is our single biggest expense that I can remember, outside of the autopsy stations that are getting put in, but they did just stay there indefinitely. But the fee thing, I think, is important because it is new revenue that we've never generated before, and it's going to be an expense later. And I could see down the road somebody questioning, hey, why do they need this 40,000 piece of equipment? But you could clearly look back at 10 years of data and say, well, they made 150,000 on the $40,000 piece of equipment, so it pays for itself, I think. But the morgue fees just kind of get forgotten about because we've got to pay for gloves or this or that. So this is really outside of it, and it will be new identifiable revenue because we do so many autopsies for the other counties. And just to explain that, we do 405 autopsies a year at our facility, and 160 of them are our own. So 160 to 180. So the rest of it, over double what we do, is somebody else's business. We just want to make sure that we're keeping track of expenses we're being, charged for that other counties would be responsible for. Yep.
Yes. Rob?
To that point, do you anticipate having 2 stations now that number could go up?
I think it's there's always opportunity. I mean, we have a county coroner from a neighboring county coming up next week to meet with us, and I think that's the discussion. I think that we're making ourselves more marketable, and that facility is going to be state of the art. So I really appreciate it, because if you look at our facility now, it's it's something else, but it's what we have today. I think that more people will come. It's going to decrease the turnaround time, and so after each autopsy, it takes us about 35 minutes to switch out because we've got to clean up, move the decedent somewhere else, wait for funeral homes and so on. And so if we don't have to do that, we're going to decrease that turnaround time by 35 minutes because the next case can be ready to go. So it might even add in, another autopsy or 2 that we can do today, whereas 5 will max us out in a day. We could probably get to 6 if there's a need. There's 4 today, so I don't know how often 6 is going to happen, but good.
Any follow-ups or other questions? All right. In that case, can I get a motion to vote on the budget as amended? Brandy and Danny. We did. Are we good to move forward? Okay. In that case, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right. We will move on to our informational items, and I did see the clerk here. Care to give your update? All right. No. Okay, the coroner's monthly update. You want to come back?
I don't have much. His Majesty is still on his way back. But I will say, if you don't know what we've been doing at our office, Jamie's been left with records all the way back from the 1920s, and we've been clearing those out of the bottom of Headington Oaks. We just went through about 150 more last week that we've shred. But in the past 2 years, we've got rid of 900 boxes of just cases that were just left to be dealt with. We file a retention policy with the state, and so we've been scanning all those in, trying to get those in a secure place where they're accessible and that I don't have to drive across town every time I need a record for somebody from 50 years ago. But I just wanted to share that. I don't know how much you pay for Headington Oaks, the basement of it, to rent, but we've gotten 900 boxes out of there, and all we have left is the giant red books that had a record of every death. And so we've been pretty busy. If you stop by our office, you'll see all those remnants in our lobby right now because we don't have anywhere else for them until recycling comes. But it has been busy. We've been using interns, and I brought one of our interns today behind me, Chidi from Illinois State University, who is helping us scan all those records and digitizing them. And I share that because we just had a collaborative with a few other coroners, and they're like, "You're doing what with records? You're scanning them? Is that something new?" I'm like, "No, it's just 2024." So we're trying to move forward and try to decrease that expense for you. And so I just wanted to share that. That's one of the big things we're doing right now, other than getting excited for our new building and getting all my POs and Heather behind me. So.
On that note, about how many boxes do you anticipate having, or what percentage in terms of evidence that you still have to hold versus being able to scan?
So we're required by law to keep any record for 10 years that's of medical nature, meaning like a heart attack or something of that nature. Homicides are indefinite, but we can scan them, and so as long as we can scan the evidence. We started electronic in 2022, and so what you're going to see here by 2032 is there will be no paper generated from our office, with the exception of a DNA card that we're required to keep for autopsy. Everything is digitized, so there's nothing paper in our office that we're using. We just finally got the state of Illinois to upgrade a vital record system so we could scan in death certificates. We were printing those, and we do about 2,300 death certificates a year that we have to print. So it's a lot less, but I would say in the new building, right now we probably still have 50 boxes of stuff that we're scanning, but once we scan, then we'll get rid of those as well.
Thank you. Any questions on their update? All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I saw Mr. Tuttle. Can we move on to your update?
So the biggest news for the ETSB is that we have Stark County online with 911, the last county in the state of Illinois. So that partnership with Peoria County started in the fall of 2021, and that was a lot of work, and we haven't completed except for text to 911 with Verizon, which should be done this week. And we should start seeing revenue from the state of Illinois for Stark County to pay their reoccurring charges starting in January. So we've met with the treasurer so that that's all ready to go. And be glad to answer any questions that anybody might have.
It was quite an undertaking. Thank you for seeing it through. Any questions on Stark County operations or anything else at the ETSB? All right. Well, thank you. PCAPS. There's Becky. Hi there.
All right, so you have my report. Just one quick note, we are working to finalize our intergovernmental agreements for animal control services with the municipalities here locally. We will be bringing those intergovernmental agreements before you next month.
All right.
I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? All right, we're moving through. Thank you. Public Defender's report.
Good afternoon. Kevin Lowe, the Peoria County Public Defender. It's good to see everybody again. Let's see, what can I report for the past quarter ending September 30th? No significant news or other updates to report. Staffing, our numbers remain the same. 22 attorneys, 6 full-time, 16 part-time, and 2 administrative staff. As far as our services provided, I've once again provided some attachments to my report regarding caseload. Of course, the Public Defender's Office continues to represent the vast majority of criminal cases from a defense perspective. The attached caseload figures for the preceding quarter, that being quarter 2 of 2024, you can see that the percentage that we are representing, that we're getting appointed to, is relatively stable. It fluctuates a bit from quarter to quarter, but you can see once again with this quarter being the second quarter, I do the preceding quarter just because it generates more accurate figures as opposed to doing quarter 3 in my quarter 3 report. But in felony cases, the public defender was appointed to 88.1% of the cases. Misdemeanor, 95.6% of the cases. In the DUI category, again, that being our lowest courtroom that we participate in, that was only at 52.3%. JD being juvenile delinquency, we were appointed to 95.6% of the cases, and domestic violence, 96.3% of the cases. So if you take those 5 categories, our office, over that period of time, being quarter 2, that 3-month period, there were 662 cases. Of those, our office was appointed 566 times. So that equals 86.3 overall in those 5 categories. And in contrast, only 109 of those cases saw private attorneys or self-represented litigants. So 109 cases, or 13.7% of the cases in that quarter. I also touch on and have a category or table that talks about detention hearings. I started tracking detention hearings under the Pretrial Fairness Act, otherwise known as the Safety Act. And in those figures, our office continues to dominate for the year, the entire year of 2024. As of September 30th, there had been 521 detention hearings. Of those 521, the Public Defender's Office handled 507 of those, a whopping 97.3% of those cases. In contrast, private attorneys appeared in only 14 of those the entire year, so that being 2.7%. So again, that just gives us an illustration of how much or what the types of services we are providing to the county. As far as caseload trends over last year, and that's table 6 in my report. If you look this year, as of September 30th, once again, it looks like all but 3 criminal categories have seen an increase of filings over last year. Notably, if you look at the felony filings, those are up 14.1% over last year. DUI really surged at this point, or at that point being September 30th, up 52.4%. Misdemeanor up as well, only 9.4%. Then domestic violence also up 23.8%. It doesn't necessarily represent a trend in any one direction or another. As I note almost every time I talk to you guys, it's cyclical. It goes up, it goes down, and we tend to just try to make our staffing decisions based on what the overall average is of those cases. And I haven't, over the past several years, although we haven't been keeping really detailed numbers, it doesn't seem that we've had much of an increase over the years prior. And as always, we do continue to handle the vast majority of criminal cases in Peoria County. And as always, I am so very proud of our attorneys and our staff who work so hard to get it done day in and day out. We have a great team, and I'm very proud of them. And of course, I always appreciate this board's continuing support. With that, I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Any questions for Kevin? All right, well, thank you, and thank you for your prompt response when we have had questions through email and in preparing, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Scott, you're up.
All right, Madam Chair, strategic plan update is in the packet, although we did skip over Becky, so if you want anything from PCAP, she's happy to give her update as well. There's, as you recall, there's nothing specifically assigned to this committee in the strategic plan update, but happy to answer any questions that is in the entire report.
No questions. All right. We'll move on to our resolutions. And can I get a motion to have the sheriff present their second contract? Danny and Nate, thank you.
Good afternoon. This is a renewal contract with DCFS. We have a deputy that's assigned to DCFS at their building on Jefferson and Peoria. If you remember me talking about this initially, it was because they had a couple investigators get killed in the state of Illinois, so this was one of the things they wanted to have, is some protection during these removals. We've had a great, so far, year and a half. It's been really good. We're renewing the contract for 3 more years. Right now, they're paying us about $130,000. Next year, we'll go up to $171,000. The year after, $175,000, and then $180,000. So we'll see some additional revenue with this contract.
Any questions on this contract or the plan over the next couple years? All right. Sounds good. All in favor? Opposed? All right. And I believe you have the next one, which is our grant agreement.
Yeah, this is a $15,000 grant that was awarded to us by ILEAS for tasers. So this will buy a few more tasers. We're going to start rotating those out on a yearly basis. So hopefully we get this grant every year to rotate those out. This is another grant that our new grant manager got us. So.
It's wonderful. Any questions? Yes, Steve. Oh, I don't believe we did. Thank you. Second, Rob, thank you. All right, any questions on this one? Wonderful. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? All right. Thank you, Sheriff. We'll move on to public comment. And miscellaneous. And we're adjourned.